Thank you very much, and I really appreciate coming here. As you know, my name is Tim Rowe. I'm going to speak in English. I hope that's okay. I'm the founder of Cambridge Innovation Center, as you heard. We run the largest facility for startups in the world in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have about 1,000 companies we support in that area. And I'm going to share with you some thoughts about how to build a bigger innovation part of an economy in a city like Bratislava. We are now working in 5 cities around the world, and our vision is to work in 50 cities around the world. So this is the beginning of something that I'm very excited about. I'm going to start by sharing with you my definition of innovation, because we're going to talk about innovation and why it's important, but we have to agree on what innovation is. So first of all, there's a lot of great ideas out there. Here's an interesting idea. This is a bicycle that you can ride on water, for instance. It really works, but I don't consider it innovation because it wasn't actually used by society. It didn't become a big part of society. You don't see people riding up and down the Danube on one of these. Okay, so this would be another kind of innovation, the hybrid engine. And you see these all over. This is a better gasoline engine that uses less gasoline, right? So this is what I mean when I say innovation, and I think we should mean, just to get the terminology right. So why do we care? I'm starting with really big picture questions. So why should we care about innovation? I think there are 2 reasons. The first is what the innovation actually does for us, okay? So if you think about a cure for a disease, if there is an entrepreneur here in Bratislava working on malaria, let's say, and they find a way to prevent malaria from spreading from mosquito to people, that's really important for all of humanity. And so we can, I think, agree that this may be the single way that we have the biggest impact on the world through the innovation itself that we can do locally. You can develop a new, better way to get to know a city, like City Sonder, and travelers around the world will understand each other. We'll have cultures that better understand each other than before. So each innovation has its power. There's a second reason that innovation is very important, however, and that is maybe a little less obvious. I'm a former consultant, now an entrepreneur, but I use a lot of data, so I apologize. You're going to see some data charts. So what you see here is where jobs are created in the United States. This is a more than 30-year period, and this is the entire US economy that we're looking at. The gray area is jobs created or destroyed by existing businesses, by large companies like IBM or Ford or General Motors. And what we see is that the large companies do create new jobs in some years, but they're very bouncy. It goes up and down, and the average is negative. So large companies, the existing economy is usually slowly shrinking. And the analogy I use is like a forest. The trees in the forest, the biggest, oldest trees eventually fall over, and there's space for little ones to come up, right? This isn't true for every company, by the way. And we'll talk about that more later, about what companies can do to stay innovative so they don't become the old tree falling in the forest. But the other piece that's really important here is the black area. The black is jobs created by startups in the United States. And so if you look over more than 30 years, what you're seeing is that startups are creating about 3 million jobs every year. And that's been very, very steady every year for 30 years. This is not something which is created by the dot-com era. It's not just one little thing. This is how a healthy economy works. So the implication is that if a country or a city is not creating new jobs, is not building a future for itself, then slowly it will decline, just like the gray. And over time, you won't see a lot of people there. You will see more crime. You will see lower incomes. You'll see a lot of unhappiness. So we need the innovation in order to keep our economies strong. So if you believe that it's important, innovation's important because of what it does for all of the world, but it's also important for what it does for each country, then the next question, the next obvious question is, how would we get more innovation? How do we make more of this, right? So that's the subject of my talk today. And I hope I can share with you some very practical ideas, both for Bratislava, but also for your individual companies. Okay, so in the old days, innovation happened in isolation. Okay, this is Nikola Tesla's laboratory. You may be familiar with Tesla. This is not the Tesla of the cars. This is the original Tesla. And he was in the mountains in Colorado. He liked to hide. He didn't want anyone to see what he was doing. This is kind of the original model, right? Benjamin Franklin would go behind his house with a kite and try to get the electricity to come down, and the lightning struck, all of that. It's the old model, right? So then there was kind of an intermediate model. People started to work in cities. This is the garage where Walt Disney created Disney Studios. This is the garage where Hewlett-Packard created the big computer company, Hewlett-Packard. And this is Steve Jobs' garage, where he and Steve Wozniak created Apple. So this was kind of the middle way, and this extended into maybe 15 years ago. But this is not how it's happening today. People are creating new companies in an environment like this. This is a picture of my center, and how many of you are familiar with Android, the mobile phone systems? Okay, so it was created here. This was a couple of guys, two people, they had an idea. They said, well, maybe we should have an open source mobile phone operating system. We know Linux, maybe that can work in mobile phones. People thought they were crazy. The story goes that they were kicking this idea around, and Google called them and said, we're really interested in what you're doing. And they said, no, we're not, it's too early. We don't really want to talk to you yet. And I don't know if this story is true or not, but I've heard this. So then the CEO of Google wrote them a letter and sent them a check for $1 million. And the CEO said, come and talk to us, and if we don't strike a deal, you can keep the $1 million. And they said, okay, we'll come and talk. And so this is the sort of the real world. It's people that are connected to other people, that are building networks. We've heard that all this morning. The way in which you get your business done is somebody introduces you to somebody that you need in order to make your business work. You're seeing environments where people are teaching each other. We heard this a lot about City Sandra, about how the team is super important and how that team forms. And what we're seeing more and more is in the United States is that these teams are forming in groups. The startups are clumping together. And one of the things that's really important is that the more experienced startups are teaching the new people. So my guess is you spend a lot of time with young people in Bratislava that want to build startups, that are asking you, how did you do this? How did you solve this problem? That teaching is probably the most important thing that is now driving the creation of new startups. So if you are in a country or a city that has a lower level of innovation nationally, maybe less venture investment, the interesting question is, what concrete things, what policies can you use to build a higher level of innovation? And our answer is that you cannot just let it happen naturally. You have to invest in this. Now, we're familiar with the notion of investing to build roads or investing to build universities. Right? That's a very common thing in society. We also know that the biggest growth in an economy comes from startups, but it's actually very rare for countries to invest in infrastructure for innovation the same way that they invest in infrastructure for education and for invention, which is the university. So what's happening now in a few cities is that there is more focus on building a kind of an environment for innovators, and that's what we have built. These are some pictures of our spaces in Boston. The lower left here is a wet laboratory. It looks like any wet laboratory, but there's something that's different, which is this wet laboratory is shared by about 40 different companies at the same time. So you're familiar with the notion of a big company, a drug company that might have its laboratory. This laboratory was created with public funds from our state, Massachusetts. They said, look, if we build a laboratory that all of the startups can use, we'll produce more startups. And producing more startups means producing more jobs. The outcome here is that in about 2.5 years, we saw $960 million of venture investment in about 50 companies that have passed through. There are 40 there now and 10 that have graduated. That is an unbelievable amount of investment. That's more investment in life sciences than Switzerland, than the country of Switzerland saw in the same years, just in one laboratory. So this is the kind of, what I'm sharing with you today is the kind of environment that we are seeing that is working for building more startups, more startup innovation. The lower left over here is a building that we built in the city of Boston. It's called District Hall. It's in the middle of the city next to our biggest art museum. The city gave it to the innovation community basically for free for 10 years, and they said, okay, we want you to have events and gatherings like the ones here today, but all the time. So we have about 800 events every year in this building now. And if you're a startup or if you're a startup network or a group, you can use this building for free. We're already seeing as a result of this a significant increase in the number of startups that we're producing in our city. So we think that there's a formula, a simple formula for how innovation is generated. And I know it's the afternoon and everyone's had probably something to eat and it's getting a little quieter. But if there's something I want to leave you with, it's a simple idea about what you can do to change this equation, all right? The equation we use is 3 elements: money, ideas, and talent. And I'm a graduate of a university in Massachusetts called MIT, and it's really easy to remember: money, ideas, and talent. Just think MIT, and then you'll get it. These are all you need. So if you have too little of one of these, you're going to have a problem, right? City Center could be a great idea, but if you can't get investment, then you're not going to move forward. So you have to ask the question, are you, is your government, is your city, are the private investors doing enough to help startups get going? That's the first thing. Ideas, this is really university research. Are your universities here doing work? Are you funding and you're supporting the professors to do work which is relevant, which is commercial? So in some places in the world, the universities are doing basic research, but they're not doing research that's relevant to the real world, and so you don't get startups. In other places, the professors are the entrepreneurs. The laws sometimes get in the way, and if your laws get in the way, you need to change them. So your professors can go out and help start new businesses with their students. This is how we do it in Massachusetts. We have the biggest life sciences innovation community in the world, the most venture investment in the world, and a big reason is that our university professors are our entrepreneurs. So that's an area, ideas is an area to focus on. And then finally, talent. What I mean here is entrepreneurial talent. I mean people who are learning to build these companies. They're not the scientists. They're not the people with ideas, usually. They're doers. They're like, what did you say? Aggressive entrepreneurs? These are aggressive people who will go out and build the companies. You have to nurture that as well. You can actually teach this sort of thing. In the United States, I send my kids out with a little table to sell lemonade. Do you have lemonade stands here in Slovakia? I don't know if that's a thing here, but it should be a thing, right? Sorry, to sell ice cream? Okay. So get your kids involved. Teach them about what it is to build a startup, to sell something. These skills are very important. I know the history of this part of the world is less entrepreneurial, but there's no reason not to start and push that further now, because in the future, you're going to need talent that understands how to build businesses and start them from scratch. In my own history, I started a business when I was in middle school, before high school. I was one of these kids that was good with computers, and my parents' friends would call and they would say, which computer should I buy? And I would say, oh, that's easy. Somebody said, you told us earlier, Lara, that we're the CTOs of our own families, right? And that was certainly true in my family. So I would say, okay, and I would spend a couple hours with them, and I would say, okay, well, you should get this, and you don't want to get that one, and you need to add this thing, and I'll show you how to use this. And then they would offer me money. And I was like, really? And then it turned into a business. And so my business was, I would go every week or so, and I would get paid a couple $100, which was a lot of money I think I was in 8th grade at the time. So I started that. I had a software business in high school. I hired a bunch of my friends from high school. We were in my father's basement. We wrote software for a lot of local businesses, like the country club and actually a pawn shop, which was kind of weird. But they paid me in really cool stuff. So you want to nurture this. You want to have more people who are doing these things and from an early age. Not everyone's going to want to, but look to your kids and see if you can encourage them, some of them, to become this kind of entrepreneur. So the environment that we think works best is kind of like a biological environment. This is why we call this an ecosystem, right? All the entrepreneurs are they have their feelers out, like amoeba, and they're kind of touching and they're finding ways to connect, and they're doing it in very natural settings, usually over a beer. They're saying, oh, okay, this is what went well. When we spoke earlier today, I said, oh, okay, here's 2 or 3 possible, market segments you could get into. And if we follow up on that, there are probably people, names, phone numbers that I can provide to follow up on those things. That's how you actually, you build a business from 1 to 10, right? So think about creating these kinds of concentrated environments where people touch. So I said concentrated, and so now I'm going to get scientific again, okay? So warning, science. So there's this interesting question of what causes people to work together. Why do people want to work together or not want to work together, right? So a lot of people don't really know the answer, but it turns out it's very simple. It turns out that we collaborate with people who we sit next to. This is a study done at AT&T's Bell Laboratories, and what it shows is that the scientists who sit next to each other, this is scientists who have their office in the same corridor of the same building, collaborate 10% of the time. And the scientists who have their offices on opposite corridors but on the same floor of the same building, they only collaborate 2% of the time. And if their offices are on 2 different floors, they only collaborate 0.3% of the time. So basically, we only collaborate, we only do projects and work with people who we know. Now, why is this? It's a kind of an interesting question. So I was actually giving this presentation in Japan, this particular slide, about a month ago, and one of my coworkers in Japan came up and said, I met my husband at work, and my husband today is the man who was sitting in the desk right next to me. And it's not surprising that that happens. It's because if you see each other every day, you start to learn to get to know each other. Sometimes you hate them, and you're not going to get married with them, right? But sometimes you really come to trust them. And if you trust someone and you like them, you're going to work with them. So what this says is if proximity is the key, it's the center to getting people to work together. If we think that money, ideas, and talent are important, it's not that complicated. What you want to get is the people with the money and the people with the ideas and the people with the talent. You want to bring them together and concentrate them, much the way in high school, to go back to an earlier meme in this conversation. In high school, we all kind of knew each other really, really, really well. So we need that high school environment, but we need it with people with money, ideas, and talent, which probably wasn't high school for most of us. Okay, so a little more science here, because this is a big point. When they study scientific production, what is scientific production? It's hard to say, but the way we usually measure it is publication of scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. Okay, so if I publish in Nature and I say, I've discovered the reason that, grass is green or something, I'll get a publication. So someone did this clever thing, and they looked at the distance. Usually these papers have many authors, and they looked at the distance between the authors' desks versus the number of papers produced. And what they found was that almost all papers were produced by people who are less than 1 kilometer apart. What it means is that people who are far apart were not producing work together. They're not collaborating. You also don't usually marry people who are far away from you, right? It's the same thing. And then they looked within 1 kilometer, and they said, inside 1 kilometer, oh, it's almost all people who are less than 50 meters apart. That's what 0.05 kilometers means, right? So basically, you're collaborating with people who are, it's the same conclusion, looked at in a different way. You're collaborating with people you're close to. They also, and I don't mean to bore you too much, but they then looked at how many times those scientific papers were cited by others. This is the way we measure quality of scientific work. If you produce a paper and other people say, oh yeah, it was based on this paper, I think this other thing, that's a citation. And what they found was that people who were in the same city got about 35% more citations than people who were in different cities. And I wish we had the same building, because I think it would be even taller. What we're saying basically is it's not just the amount of things you do together, which is more if you're close, but the quality of what you do together is much higher when you're close. Okay, so if proximity is the key to getting more collaboration, what do you do as a result of that? That's where we're getting to the kind of the main point here. It turns out that we've known the answer a long time ago. You basically have to get all the bright, creative people physically close together. And we have a good example of this. There's a building in Boston over 100 years ago, in 1879, right where our city hall is today. And it had a shop on the ground floor. The shop sold telegraph instruments. So you remember the old telegraph, right? I think we all studied it. So there weren't probably very many places in the world that had shops that sold telegraph parts. And they had batteries, and they had wires, and they had the kind of things that made inventors excited, right? And so guess who moved in to this building? He rented the upper right room there, Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. And at the very same time, Thomas Edison, who invented the light bulb, also rented in the very same building. So these guys hated each other. They were fiercely competitive, but they were also using the same network. So this guy, Lewis Latimer, was one of the shopkeepers in that ground floor store. And they both used him to do their patent drawings. So in 1879, how easy was it to find information about how to get patents approved by the US Patent Trademark Office? Probably not very easy. There are probably not a lot of people back in 1879 who really understood this, but they used a hub, an innovation hub, as a way to get that knowledge to spread amongst their entrepreneurs. And it gave them the ability to invent two of the biggest inventions of all time, the telephone and the light bulb. So, is this happening today? Yes. Kendall Square is the densest hub of innovation on the planet today. This is the area next to MIT in Cambridge. If you measure it by venture investment per person, it's about $550 of venture investment per year per person over the last decade. You're going to ask me, California is about 460, something like that. So it's a very, very intense place for innovation. But it wasn't always that way. So this is a picture from 1969. You've got MIT here over on the right. This is all MIT in here. As you can see, there was really nothing there. It was a wasteland. Okay? MIT has been around for 150 years. So you can have a good university, but actually be bad at innovation, in essence. And that's where we were in the 60s, right? Today, it looks completely different. Here's MIT still here. This is all laboratories and offices supporting innovation. There are no firms here that aren't doing innovation. There are no big financial services firms, no big law firms. It's all labs and offices of drug companies and companies like Google and Microsoft and so forth. So what happened? Well, a bunch of things happened, but one of the things that happened was about 17 years ago, we built an innovation center, a physical hub for startups right here. And this is a map done by MIT that shows where the startups are. This is MIT here. This is their logo. And this just shows where the startups are. And there's one big spot where a whole bunch of them clumped. So we arrived in 1999. And then, lo and behold, Google said, OK, this would be an interesting place for us to put Android. And then Microsoft moved into the two buildings next door. And then Amazon moved into our building. And then Apple moved into our building. What are they doing? So Apple is doing Siri, the voice recognition, which requires the algorithms that you find in a technical university. Google did Android, of course. They bought a little startup called Android. They also did the Google Books project. Amazon here did their Fire Phone, which is their Amazon's entry into the phone arena. Just to show you a few more, Facebook showed up. Sanofi came in, a French company, and bought a startup called Genzyme. This area now, if I showed you the map of all the companies, is probably 200 innovation companies all over this area. And the rents have increased a little bit, as you can imagine, and the place has become, it's hummed. It's become the place to be. So what kind of people are there here? What do these places look like? Just to give you a little flavor to make this a little more real, this woman on the left, her company Gene Peaks, is helping families thinking about having kids deal with genetic issues. They take the genes of the mother and the father and they match them, and they will tell you if there are going to be some genetic issues that you're going to face. Sometimes those are addressable and sometimes those aren't, in which case you might want to adopt or do something else. This is the founder of Android, who I already mentioned, Rich Miner. Leslie Dewan in the middle, she's invented a new kind of nuclear power plant. It uses molten salt as their primary means of moving the energy. And the power, the fuel source, is actually the spent fuel of traditional nuclear power plants. So she gets paid to take her fuel source. She doesn't have to pay for it. She generates energy from it, and then her spent fuel is much less radioactive, and so it's better for the environment than the traditional spent fuel. She was a student at MIT when she started working on this, and to give you an idea of the kind of crazy people, she was annoyed that she had to use her MIT ID card to get into the buildings, and so she cut the chip from the ID card out, and she implanted it in her hand. She cut the skin and put the chip in so she could just put her hand on the buildings to let herself in. This is the kind of environment, the kind of people we're talking about. This guy went to graduate school at MIT. He's from India. He had an idea for a company called HubSpot, if you're familiar with it. This is the world's leading internet tools company for marketing, like to figure out how your marketing is going, what you need to do to get better marketing on the internet. He grew that to about 200 people in our center, and now it's at about 1,100 people one building away. This is the bright guy. Many of the entrepreneurs are not from the United States, which is important to know. The US is successful not because American entrepreneurs are successful, but because we built the best system to support entrepreneurs. And I think that can apply also to everywhere, right? You're seeing companies like Skype come out of Tallinn, Estonia, right? So these companies can come from everywhere. They're not limited to one place. I just want to touch on this last guy. So Theo is his name. He's out of our Rotterdam, Netherlands facility. And he had this idea. He's seeing all these refugees coming across the country due to the challenges in Syria and so forth. And this has become a big social problem. But at the same time, a lot of these refugees have skills. A lot of them are doctors or they have PhDs. They have tremendous capabilities. So he built a startup accelerator for refugees. Of course, the governments were thrilled because now we're taking a problem and turning it into something successful. They've had dozens of companies get started inside this accelerator over the last year, and he's the toast of the town in the Netherlands. So these are the kinds of interesting ideas that come out of these environments. So I'm conscious of time, and I've gone for a while, but I have a couple more things to share. So one is a little bit about how you'd actually build some hub like this if you were to do this in Bratislava. We have a model that we've used elsewhere, and I'm sharing it with you today. So basically, you want a big building, the type that HB Reavis builds. That's why we're here. We know these guys. You put in innovation space. This is kind of like what you think of as a co-working center, but only 5% of our space is traditional co-working, is open spaces and people. Someone asked a question, I think, maybe it was of you, Florian. What if you don't like these open spaces? Actually, for a lot of the serious companies, they have rooms with doors and locks, like real traditional offices. About 95% of our innovation center is that, because the company may have intellectual property that's worth millions of dollars, and they do need to lock it up. We have laboratories, like the picture I showed you, not just life sciences laboratories, but robotics laboratories. We have a food laboratory. We have a maker space, which I'm sure you have as well, and a design laboratory. We have a clubhouse. I think, Lara, you talked about belonging, the feeling that people have that they want to belong and be part of something. So we actually have it's kind of like an Irish bar, except all the beer is free, but you have to be an innovator to go. And we have, I think, when we built one of these in a smaller city in St. Louis, last year we had 28,000 people come and attend events in our clubhouse. So it's very valuable to kind of build these facilities that draw the community together. We built a community foundation a nonprofit whose job is to build the innovation community. So this is not just for-profits and for startups. This is also, you need to build the social fabric that strengthens your communities. This is paid for by the government and by the universities and so forth. It's not expensive, but you actually have to have a staff whose job is to make a better innovation ecosystem in your city. It just doesn't happen automatically. We've drawn then around us lots of corporations, venture investors, people who invest in startups. We have the British consulate moved in. The French set up a facility to connect French startups and Boston startups. The Chinese have 25 people that they put inside our facility, and their job is, they're government employees of China, and their job is to connect China and the US market. The Canadians bring 8 companies every 3 months in, and they get these companies to learn about the market and to try to figure out how to sell into our market. So these things, these spaces become kind of like hives of activity. I just threw in the logos of some of the different organizations that we work with throughout all of these categories. I won't spend too much time on it. I'm going to close on this topic. If you're a business person here in Bratislava and you're thinking about innovation, you say, okay, thanks, Tim. We've learned a little bit about how it works in Cambridge. But what does this mean actually at home? What does this mean tomorrow? What could I do? So the first thing is something you know. Startups are rapidly changing almost every industry. You know it, but I'm just going to say it, right? You look at Airbnb as an example. In New York now, there are more room nights with Airbnb than room nights with all hotels. If you look at Uber, there are more rides in New York now than there are taxi rides in New York. Right, so these new models very quickly replace entire industries. Maybe there'll be more city sonder visits than there will be, hotel nights for the major hotel chains. I don't know. I hope so, right? But industries change very quickly and very significantly, right? So you have to be prepared for that. Apple changed the way the music industry worked completely, as you understand, and basically owns the entire music industry. That may seem like an established company, but was a startup not long ago, right? So. Just to kind of put some numbers around it, we talked about Android earlier. The blue is the worldwide market share for Android. The black, by the way, is all of you people who have iPhones. The iPhone does very well in wealthier countries, and this is one of those in that category. But in the developing world, it's all Android. And there are an unbelievable number of devices there, and you can kind of see where it's likely to go long term, right? Meanwhile, Nokia, the world's leader in cell phones, back in 2007, when smartphones first showed up, is basically dead, as we all know. So you know this story, but it's worth keeping it in mind as you think, okay, so what does this mean for my business? So what is the solution? You want to partner. How do you partner? You can invest. You can say, okay, I don't really know what, and you didn't ask me to do this, but I don't really know what City Sonder means for my business. I'm a bank. But maybe it means something, and I'm going to get involved with these guys and see where that goes, right? There could be 10 or 20 other possible companies like that if you think out of the box, if you think creatively, maybe there's a place this takes us. So Sanofi here, a big French pharmaceutical company, spent $21 billion buying a startup pharma company, Genzyme, startup biotech. And what they said, the CEO here, I don't know which one's smiling more. This is the one who got the $21 billion. That's the one who paid the $21 billion. But what the one who paid it said was, we needed to be here. This had become an innovation cluster we had to be in. We had to be involved in this new area that we weren't involved in. And I think that that's probably the chief message. It's important to understand that startups really need you if you're an established business, right? Startups need money. Right? That always, and you may have it, right? So there's a basis for a conversation. Established companies have facilities the startups might want, right? I was mentioning earlier, if American Express Travel Services were in a conversation with City Sonder, that would be pretty interesting for City Sonder, because they have offices all over the world. They could really spread the model, right? Bigger companies have a lot more people, so they have the ability to work at scale. They're often global in how their reach, and they often have science and technology resources that startups don't have. So if you're a bigger company, understand that you have a lot that startups want, and so there's a basis for a conversation. I have I'm going to essentially close on this. I have sort of 8 suggestions. This is a mix of things that you could do to actually engage with startups, right? The first is we see a lot of big companies co-locating. So if there's a place or a building or an area or a neighborhood where the startups are, maybe part of your business, maybe your innovation department, maybe your new business strategy people need to be there, right? Because it's those proximities that we talked about before. It's the knocking on the next door neighbor's door and starting a conversation. That's probably the biggest thing that you can do, is to physically be close to companies that might be impacting your business. You can actively track down relevant startups. These won't only be in Bratislava. They might be in Budapest, or they might be in Prague, or they might be in New York, or Boston, or San Francisco, or Tokyo, right? So there are ways to do this, but this is real work. You need a team whose job is to figure out who in the world is doing stuff that's going to change your business, get to know them. There's no reason why you shouldn't be investing in a Japanese startup if it might change your business here. Lots of consultants do this. You can also do this in-house. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you need to understand what the key trends are. We were hearing before, you need to know who your competitors are. You need to know who your substitutes are, who the next thing is, what's a different way to solve the problem than the way your business does it today. Throw a party. So NTT Docomo came to town in Boston. They're the world's largest telecommunications company. Right now, they claim that. And they said, you know what, we don't know this innovation community, so we're going to throw a big party. We're going to bring our top executives. Everybody who comes, we're going to give you a nice bottle of Japanese sake. And we're going to tell you what we do at NTT. And tell us what you do. It can be as simple as that. Just reach out and connect. A fun way to do it is throw at a party. Gather experts and young people and ask them. We saw some of these pictures from City Sandra as well. Conduct a focus group. It's not complicated. You don't need an expert to do this. Just sit down and start asking people. So I did an event with a bunch of millennials and millennial entrepreneurs, young 20-something entrepreneurs, and the president of one of our biggest banks in Massachusetts. And the president came in and said, you know, I want to know what you guys think, and they sort of didn't have an answer. And he said, well, what do you think about our bank branches? And they said, well, we don't use bank branches. We haven't been to a bank branch for forever. And he's like, well, this is one of my biggest expenses, is my bank branches, right? So clearly there's a something which is going to happen there. Banks haven't changed yet the way taxis or hotels have, but they're gonna. We just don't know how yet, but they're going to change a lot. Right? So you should be able visit the innovation hubs, go travel around the world, talk to the people who are doing things in other cities around the world where they're innovating, host conferences like this one. Thank you again, HB Reavis, for sponsoring this. You got to get together. You got to talk about this stuff. You got to learn from each other. And then connect with luminaries. So this is my friend who founded Android. Those people are out there. You can invite them and their spouse to come and sit down with you, and they'll have dinner and just think about the future. These things are possible. There are probably 1,000 people in the world that you should be having dinner with. Pick 10 of them and go have dinner with them. So that's my message. I'll end with a quote from the famous Mr. Gates, and it's absolutely right. There's never before in history been a time where things are moving so fast. There's so much promise. You just have to go out there and do it. Thanks very much.